This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
Bryan Kohberger's defense team making some bold moves in this last week. And while not officially on the table as of our recording, by the time you hear this, it probably will be. Looking at throwing autism spectrum disorder, ASD, into the mix as a potential mitigating factor to likely avoid the death penalty. Okay? It's important to understand what that is all about, what that means in the context of reality and this story. Here's a real question, though. Does this change the way we should analyze his behavior, planning, and potential criminal intent? Kohberger is on the spectrum. Does it actually explain some of his behaviors, or is it just a legal smokescreen? To break it all down from a behavioral analysis standpoint and law enforcement perspective, Robin Dreeke, retired FBI special agent and former chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program. Robin, from a profiling type standpoint, when you look at his actions, all the actions attributed to Kohberger, stalking the house, planning the attack, allegedly, attempting to cover his tracks. Do these seem consistent with someone who struggles with impulse control and social awareness, or do they point to high-functioning, deliberate decision-making?
Well, you know, when we cover these really complex cases, which is the only thing that we do, there's always something new. And this one was something new I hadn't seen before. You know, it's like using autism as an excuse or mitigator in his behavior. I hadn't heard it before, so I had to actually do some digging on my own.
Yeah.
First of all, kind of going to the original question, his behaviors are still much more in line with someone who's escalating their violence, you know, which is on a track to, again, if it's him or whoever was doing this, you know, that serial killer in developmental kind of profile, or at least someone who is on a track to continue to commit more violence. And so on the autism question, I only found two slight things, and this kind of goes to what I think, again, you know, the great defense attorney is doing. She's throwing everything she can at the wall here. You know, you said bold moves. I think it's desperate moves, because she keeps getting things, you know, thrown out in their favor. And so here's what I found. There's only very small bodies of literature when it comes to autism and crime. And most times what they're finding is that people on the spectrum are more likely to be victims of violent crime than actually perpetrating the violent crime.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. That's why it was an interesting tactic I found her taking. But then there was another little tingle of something regarding that, and it's right here. Just saying, people with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, may be less culpable for their actions in some cases due to deficits in moral reasoning and social skills. However, most people with ASD are law-abiding citizens. So most likely she's doing what you and I are doing. You know, you take patterns of behavior, you take research, you take everything you can and see it, and if anything fits. And so, in other words, when you get a little teeny, not even a full data point, but a microspec or a touch point of data point, that's all you're grabbing onto at this point, it means it's getting pretty desperate for them.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like that's where we're getting, that we're literally getting down now to arguing, well, if he does get convicted, you can't kill him because of this. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword for them, I think, because, I mean, you're not admitting guilt, but you're like, if you do think he's guilty, have a little bit of mercy on him, because look at the way his brain works. It also explains kind of the recipe for the path that he went on. Again, not everybody with ASD goes on a killing spree. Very, very, very few do. Just like in society, a very small percentage actually go out and do these sort of things as a whole. But some do, and some have very good skills at it because of their spectrum disorder and the way that they're able to meticulously plan things to such a degree that a neurotypical person just wouldn't.
You know, it's interesting. You know, I don't know if the audience as they're watching when we're doing our back and forth here is like, as soon as we hit on something, you can actually see my brain start to marinate on these things. And so, as you're talking, I'm like, another thought struck me on this that I think is very congruent with what we're seeing that she's been doing, and that's the defense. And that is, I don't think at this point she's doing as much for him and his defense as she's working on the jury. And here's what I mean by that. So when you look at those microscopic, data points of autism regarding Kohberger himself as a defense, it's like, what? But if you think about it, so a lot of times when we're trying to identify with others, an identifying feature that we have in common with a lot of people is someone has either been part of someone who suffered from cancer, has had cancer, and so cancer is a big binder between a lot of people because a lot of people have suffered through that, and so it's a binder of people. Autism and being on a spectrum is also something that a lot of people can identify with. Either they have it, they know someone who's have it, and it's created situations in people's life that elicit compassion. And so for her to bring up that he's on the spectrum or even insinuate that he's on the spectrum, it gives her the ability to form an emotional connection between the jury and Kohberger. Again, I think at this point, and I've said this from the very beginning, she's trying to save his life. And when you're trying to save a life, the best way to do it at this point, if there's overwhelming data points of DNA evidence, the best thing she can do is make an emotional connection between the jury and Kohberger. And I think if I'm in a good empathetic mind, this is an effective way it might work.
I agree. I think the sticky point here and the question I have is how many people recognize what someone who is on the autism spectrum look like? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think a lot of people think it's pretty extreme and like, oh, well, they're in their own special world over here. And it's not. I mean, it's like some of the most successful, some of the most driven people out there are on that. And that's what gives them the superpower to be able to do what they do. I mean, are there the opposite end of the scales where it's very low functioning and debilitating? Yes, there are. But it is so wide, and it can be a superpower or it can be a hindrance to a lot of things in life. And then there's everything, in between. And all the various, functions that people can have where it's like, you're really good at this to a crazy degree. And it seems that, Kohberger really does kind of fit a lot of that. But again, how much is a jury going to understand this? How much are they going to be able to look at his younger years behavior, the examples that we know of his behavior and go, oh yeah, that's a different brain. Like he's thinking differently. And how much are they going to care at the end of the day going, he knows right and wrong? Because I don't think anybody's can argue that if you're autistic or you're on the autism spectrum that you don't know right from wrong. You can certainly have a lack of empathy, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't care or that you don't know that what you're doing is truly wrong. So I just wonder how well that will stick with the jury, just considering how calculated this is and to people that he doesn't necessarily have a close connection to.
I'm with you. I think it's a stretch, and it's going to be. I mean, it's a huge challenge that she has. But again, let's play out again my conjecture and thought experiment of what I would try to do if I was her, and I have nothing to work on, and that is so. It gives her the ability, though, in a courtroom to define autism in all its nooks and crannies, to try to capture as many people emotionally as she can on that jury. Because like you just described, it's a wide swath. And then if she can describe this wide swath of people that it can then identify with, whether it's them as individuals or them knowing people, maybe their own children or someone related to their lives, that's an effective tactic. And then, so think about this. People have been labeling his behavior, including myself, as really psychopathic, lack of empathy, this whole self-centered narcissism kind of thing, right? But if she can redefine him as autistic instead, that's going to have another little data point that might affect only one person that she needs to not agree with death penalty. And so I think she's really, really doing her best to throw as many darts, emotional darts as she can at the armor of others that are going to be judging. That's why we got to change a venue. We have time between the event and the trial. We have all these different nooks and crannies that she is really doing, I think, a phenomenal job exploring because the data is not supporting her. The facts are what the facts are. Now she's shifting from data. She failed on getting DNA specific scientific data admissible, and now she's got to shift to emotions.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, her first play at that.
And that's where we're looking. I mean, and that's the thing with something like this. Yes, we've been looking at psychopathy and all sorts of areas over there of what could be going on in Kohberger's mind. And there's various traits that overlap quite a bit with various, levels of autism, depending on where you're on the spectrum. It doesn't mean people with autism are psychotic, but you can have certain traits like the lack of empathy, social awkwardness, things of that nature, where, they do kind of shift. And the two can coexist. That's another point to make. You can be on the spectrum and also be a psychopath or, borderline narcissist, all of that. There's all these things that he could be. And at the end of the day, it's just a term. It's just a name. I think it really comes down to right and wrong. Did he know what he was doing was right or wrong? Otherwise, it's a label, and labels, they define things, but they don't necessarily explain things.
And it could also have, could also completely backfire her on as well, because this is the first case that you and I have covered that this has popped up. I mean, we have never had any case that we've covered that autism has been even mentioned as anything regarding it. And so because of that, it could also have an extremely negative effect because, people that have autism, it's a special needs. And so to be using someone like everyday Joe's special needs as a defense could really inflame a lot of people as well, because you're trying to say that, my son or my daughter or my friend could commit these heinous things because they have autism. See what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was really going to depend if she uses it, how she presents it. It could be fraught with even worse peril than she imagined.
I find it very interesting, the information you found that's out there that victims are more likely to be someone on the spectrum versus being someone on the spectrum executing it. And I wonder how accurate that stat is. Number one,
I named it. So it came from a small body of literature suggested that rather than being more likely to engage in offending or violent behavior, individuals with autism spectrum disorder may actually have an increased risk of being the victim rather than the perpetrator of violence, from a study done by Sobsey, Wells, Lucardi, and Mansell, 1995.
But that's also, even 95, we're going way back on this.
Way back.
Way back before we even really had a huge grasp on what this is.
Because there's not much out there on it.
No, and there wasn't much, there really was hardly anything out there on it back then, especially compared to what we know 30 years later. Yep. Because I would almost argue, when we look at the cases that we look at, that you have more than not that are very likely on the spectrum than are. So, I think it has a lot to do with just data and knowing if someone is or not. I think a lot of people just live their whole lives with no clue. And so I think if we truly, if you evaluated every single person that went in for a violent crime or something and to determine are they there, I think it's the other way around, quite honest. That's just my conjecture. And obviously it's a 95 study. And I'm surprised there's not more, surprised that hasn't been looked at closer.
I know. It's like when this came up, I was really shocked. Like we were just saying that you and I have not had this element of things we've covered ever come up before.
Well, we go to psychopathy and all that so quick, but a lot of it does mimic in certain.
And so let's examine, we can take a quick examination is the why of that as well. And I think because, to your point, forms of autism, excuse me, on that spectrum are so common with so many people that it's kind of a background noise that is always in our society anyway. Yeah. And so it's such a part of everyone's whole that it can never really be measured as accurately as I think, especially when it comes to court of law.
I think it's so broad of a term as well. And I think it's something that needs to be honed in a little bit and not just, it's like saying food. Do you like food? There's all different types of food. What are we talking about specifically? Well, food. It's food. There's a lot of variations in this.
Or even saying, hey, I'm someone who's easily distracted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who isn't easily distracted? It's all varying degrees.
Sure.
So, we all see shiny things. Sometimes it takes me 5 seconds to look at the shiny things. Takes you one, takes someone else, they completely ignore it.
It's a very large catch-all that's still out there. The prosecution doesn't want any mental health information coming into trial. They now have copies of everything, and they're going to be filing a motion, if they have not already, basically to get that info out of the trial. So it cannot be used as an argument. It can't be used at all. Just not going to be something that they want in there. What do you think? I don't know if that's a great idea on the part of the prosecution. I mean, the prosecution, obviously their goal is to prosecute this man and find him guilty. Death, I don't know that needs to be the goal. It's certainly a possible punishment. But if we're looking at convicting, I think this actually can work in their favor more than it works against the prosecution.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd love to know what's in their minds. Since they're making the action, all we can do is sit here and kind of imagine ourselves as them as to why they would take that action and what the outcome they're seeking of it is. So the outcome that they're seeking is to get a conviction. And at this point, since they have solid data to support what they want to do, they don't want anything to take away from the data they have, like the DNA evidence and cell phone evidence and things like that. And so that since they know that defense is going to be focusing on the emotional aspect of things, I think they want to remove any possibility of an emotional rationale that someone's going to use. Well, yeah, he did this. It was still a choice. But because of this, because of his mental issues he had, is why he did it. In other words, I think they're trying to take away excuses that Ann Taylor is going to put out there as to reasons why he did this is because he suffered this, he suffered this, he suffered this. I think their prosecution becomes easier potentially if you're just looking at the DNA. It's his DNA. It's in the room. It's on the knife sheath. The cell phone data says he was there. The car's in the neighborhood. He stalked it. The cell phone was on every single time he went by there, except the day that he committed the murder or assumed, that he's accused of committing the murder. So I think they want to just really, really, really rely upon the actual evidence rather than have any possibility of sympathy creeping in with mental issues.
But do you think there would be enough sympathy there to find him not guilty or acquit? No. I would think that even if, I think it explains him more.
All right.
I think, if the defense is solely basically operating on the grounds of, let's save his life, and they're pretty much abandoning everything else, which I don't know. I mean, it feels like we're getting close to that point without saying it out loud. Obviously, they're going to try and fight for him. I would be shocked if they went in there and used this as a defense simply just to save his life, or if that would end up being a plea deal of some sort. That if they even want to offer him a plea deal on this. I mean, certainly it would save the taxpayers. It would save the community from having to go through a whole hellish trial. But I don't know that the community would not want to have that trial take place either, even though it's many, many, many miles away in Boise and all the families are going to have to travel, which is a whole other issue. I don't know. I mean, would this be something, if it were to be settled like that, of, look, admission of guilt, and you're not going to die, but you're going to prison for the rest of your life? Do you see that being a happier ending for these families psychologically, or do we need to go through the motions of the trial, which will likely eventually, lead to him either being killed or put away forever? Other things could happen, but
I only the families can answer that question, really. About what it is they need to feel complete and whole and move through the pain they're moving through. And I think, because again, not being the lawyer, not being a legalized expert in any way whatsoever, I think they're beyond, from what we're seeing, I think they're beyond any sort of plea deals. I think it's gonna go through one way or the other. Yeah. So again, I don't know why they're taking that action, why prosecution is taking that action. All I can do is kind of do my best, throw ourselves in their shoes and what potentially could be it through our conjecture, and kind of looking behaviorally at it. But again, I think everything that's going on now is really geared at the jury or the potential jurors that are coming in.
Is ASD, autism spectrum disorder, something that should be better understood in terms of law enforcement, in terms of investigators, in terms of just looking at some of these cases. Because again, we often go to the triad, the psychopathy or all sorts of other disorders that could be going on over there, like in the anti-personality scale, but. Is that something to consider more, that should be understood more to better understand the people that you're investigating? I mean, let me ask you, when you were in the counterintelligence world and stuff, is that something that ever came to mind with individuals that you were investigating of, this person might be over here and this might explain some of the behavior? How well is that sort of stuff integrated into understanding others' actions?
That's a great question. I never, ever, in the course of my career, had a situation where I took an action or mitigated what I was doing based off of someone claiming or saying they had autism. Matter of fact, I never had any case where it even came up. That's why this is literally the first time in my career where autism came up as kind of the forefront of something that someone's going to use. Now, did I have knowledge of someone's potential autism spectrum? Yeah, every now and then you did. But what it did, it became part of a way to understand someone at a deeper level so you could communicate more effectively. Because remember, everything that I ever did came down to how do you form a relationship so that you can share information, get information, and protect national security of the United States, protect our country, our society, protect our state, local. I mean, so it all came down to how can I communicate more effectively and better? And if autism and where someone was at on a spectrum, I didn't ever look at a diagnosis of autism. I always looked at what's that mean for communication? What's that mean for ability to form a relationship and a bond? And it never was a situation where it was a hindrance in any way. Yeah. It just became one more data point for a way that I need to communicate more effectively. So I was never looking at the autism. It gave me maybe some way to look at you, but I'm always just looking at your behavior. I'm looking at how do you need to connect with me? Because this is all the bottom line, it always is. Yeah. What can I do to inspire you to feel safe with me? What can I do to inspire you to feel safe with a decision to cooperate with me? Yeah. And so in the courtroom, that's the basic thing they're trying to do. The defense, Ann Taylor, right? She's strategizing this. What can she do to inspire the jury to feel safe and comfortable with acquittal? And on the opposite side, what's the prosecution doing to inspire the jurist to feel safe and comfortable with themselves with conviction? And so that's all. And so part of that is, how do I need to communicate that feeling of safety and trust with what I'm presenting them? Yeah. And so it's the same thing in all these situations.
Sure. It's everybody. Yeah. Everybody is different. Everybody has different things that you're going to have to speak to so they feel safe and comfortable communicating with you. And you have to craft that for each individual. It's not here's one size fits all. I wonder how Kohberger is feeling about this angle. I do wonder, because we look back, and this is just pure conjecture, he seems to recognize, when he talks about the visual snow and stuff like that back in his teen years, that he recognizes that there's something different going on. And we don't really know a whole lot about his demeanor today, other than what we've heard from, students and coworkers of all he's kind of, odd out there and not very personable. So I wonder how accepting he is of this, if he just knows that, that's who he is, or if he'd want that even to be out there. At this point, he doesn't have much of a choice. I mean, he's literally fighting for his life, but he seems to be someone who thinks he's in a lot of control. And people who are in a lot of control don't necessarily, or are not necessarily super fond of things out there that they may view, although it may be incorrect, that they may view as a weakness or something that would make them less than, which being on the spectrum does not make someone that. But I could see someone with that sort of, godlike complex ego not being super happy about that.
So putting on my if I was Kohberger hat, challenge might be, you look at his data points for his life arc. From everything that we've seen from the small little things we have throughout his life, he's he's been pretty curious about trying to understand himself. That's why he's going into this line of work. I would think, again, all these other things might pop up. His rage, his lack of feeling control, or someone labeling it. All those things might be in there. But at the same time, though, he seems to be a pretty curious individual and more on the science than emotional side. My bet is he's, when she mentioned it as a possibility, I don't guarantee. I'm pretty sure that she's the one that came up with this idea. And she probably presented it to him. And his next steps was probably to get really curious. Because he's been trying to understand why he is like he is for a long time, and this might be one deep dive he might do to do it as well, maybe. I mean,
I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose anybody. But I mean, just watching his behavior, right away, I was like, oh, he's totally on the spectrum. I mean, I could say it immediately almost. So again, I would not be remotely surprised by any means. It would be very interesting to see where they take this and what kind of defense this provides them, if any, or if the judge again says, yeah, nice try, no.
The latest true crime stories, expert breakdowns, and shocking twists, all in one place. Press subscribe now to the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.